James Ruse students and special guests, welcome to this important day in Australian education, the launch of Make a World of Difference, a guide to global citizenship. Dr. Sam Johnston is with us today. He's from the United Nations think tank. Please welcome to the stage, Dr. Sam Johnston.
As George said, I work for a think tank part of the UN. It's called the United Nations University, and it's a very special part of the UN, a unique part of the UN, in that we are the only part of the UN which isn't controlled by governments. Uniquely, UNU is controlled by a governing body which is comprised of 24 individuals who are acting in their individual capacity. So we are answerable to them, but they're answerable to an absolute truth, if you want, not to a government, not to a political position, but to an absolute way of serving the United Nations and helping the United Nations. One of those four areas is on education, and I'm sure you don't need to be told how important education is, because it's the cornerstone of developing a fairer, a more equitable, a more sustainable society. It's the engine room of change comes through education. Children and the way they're brought up and the values they're taught by society, by the educational sector, by the parents, is what shapes what society looks like tomorrow. At the national and regional and international level, a lot of discussion, a lot of argument, a lot of ideas are very, very abstract, and they're removed from everyday experience, and the language that's used is incredibly complex, and for the average person, incredibly meaningless. And so what is become much more prevalent and very powerful over the last decade or so with the advent of new technologies is actually bringing real stories about real successes to those attenuated, dislocated kind of conversations happening in New York and Geneva. And that's why, for instance, it's a great honour and a privilege for us at UNU to be associated with this textbook, because it's a wonderful example, a concrete example of a great good story. There are many others that I work with in Australia in particular, which I could talk about, but this is a really exciting one. The energy of the team behind it is inspiring, and that's evident in the textbook. So again, it's for us as a think tank, it's very important to have our ideas and our work grounded in realities and grounded in local people doing real things to change their local community, because those stories, when they're communicated at the international level for sure, are very, very powerful, and in many respects nowadays more powerful than the fancy kind of documents which the UN agencies produce, which are full of facts and figures and very well researched and very well written, but in a sense kind of meaningless, because everything's reduced to percentages and GDPs and stuff like that. So that's why it's very important for us. Well, we're very honoured to be associated with that, but I also wanted to leave that message with you, because all of your work here, at whatever level, can inspire a lot of change outside of your local community. And we at the UN are very interested in these kind of local community stories, and me at UNU is very interested as well, and be happy to hear from any kind of other interesting endeavours like this one. But
there was an article in the Herald a couple of years ago that said they'd done a survey, and they said that 40% of primary-aged children were lying in bed at night worrying about the impact of climate change. And when I read it, it really just made my heart go like that, because I thought, oh, these poor worried kids, like all lying in bed worrying about climate change. And it actually reminded me a bit about myself. I grew up in sort of late 70s, early 80s, and I used to lie in bed at night and worry about nuclear war, because that was at the height of the Cold War. And one of the reasons why I think there was this at the core of the anxiety, and I think it's probably similar with the kids lying in bed at night worrying about climate change, was that you knew a problem existed, you knew it was an enormous problem, but you felt absolutely hopeless about doing anything about it. You felt completely powerless in the world. Adults didn't seem to care or notice, and they seemed to be ruining the world around you, and there was nothing you could do about it. And now that I'm a parent and a soon-to-be parent of a second child, you think a lot about this, because you do want to raise your child with a sense of optimism about the world. You want them to raise them with a sense that the world is a good place, that the world is an equal place. But of course, it isn't. The world isn't a perfect place. It's not an equal place. We're not even born equal. You can't even say that to your children with any sense of truth. There is great inequality, particularly between developed nations and developing nations. And where you're born still pretty much determines your outcomes in life and the course that your life will take. So how do parents and teachers in the developed world explain to our students, to our kids about all this inequality, make sure that they understand the seriousness of the issues, make sure they care about the issues, but at the same time make sure that they don't become so paralysed by anxiety that they feel they cannot change anything or do anything about it? Well, what you do is you do what's been happening here. You do it through the curriculum materials that have been developed today. You do it by educating kids, by teaching them to learn, to understand the causes of global problems, but also not to feel that there's nothing they can do about it. Also, the answers are not just passive answers or academic answers about responses, but actually saying to kids, this is the problem, you can care about the problem, and guess what? You can do something to change it. You're not alone. You may feel like you're one drop in the ocean, but remember, every drop can cause a tide. It'll give our kids that end up learning the curriculum through the national curriculum process and through this curriculum as it's rolled out, that they are the future generation, that they do have a say in the world, that they do have a role in changing the way things are, and through very obvious concrete examples, you can see that already, that that's happening.
Make a World of Difference, a guide to the global citizen, has been developed over the past 2 years as a result of my travelling around to both primary and secondary schools throughout New South Wales and Victoria to engage students in the Hope for Cambodian Children Foundation, Shades for AIDS education and fundraising initiative. In my experience, much focus is often placed on developing shining young leaders within the school's environment who we all hope will develop into the young leaders of tomorrow. It seemed evident to me that there was a distinct lack of educational resources that actively encourage students to look out for each other, to address bullying and discrimination, religious or sexual orientation, social or economic background. There was little material that used real-life organisations as examples of ways that students could actively contribute to their communities, either locally, nationally, or globally, where our own governments often fall short of the realisation of their own dreams and goals. That students could be empowered to set their own dreams and goals, strive to achieve them, and make a difference to the enrichment of their own lives, as well as the lives of others who, for no other reason than for the accident of birth, have not been offered the same opportunities as most of us. Make a World of Difference, a guide to the global citizen, is a fun, engaging and challenging way to deliver the learning outcomes of the current school curriculum and the new Australia curriculum.
We are very lucky at this very moment in time that we have a new curriculum coming in. And this topic fits in beautifully with the whole thing. But the aim of it actually is that we want to have students that are responsible, active global citizens who actually work towards a more just, equitable and sustainable, peaceful world. I went through all the curriculum and you will notice that it actually integrates within all the subjects. In English, teachers are actually got narrative stories, empathy exercises, and also critical literacy is very forth in the curriculum. Maths, the teachers are actually doing diagrams, they're doing graphs, they're interpreting graphs. There are two really major components in the new syllabus. One is global wellbeing, where you do poverty, Millennium Development Goals, and health, and obviously AIDS comes into that. And then in a world in the making, which is all about making a difference. So this really is very interesting because we're now at a moment in time in which this topic can be integrated across the curriculum. It actually complements the National Statement on Asian Literacy, which is all about Asia and Australia's engagement with Asia. And this particular project actually focuses on Cambodia. The other important document is the National Statements of Learning for Civics and Citizenship. It's all about developing informed, responsible citizens and the values which are all about fairness, participation, democracy, care, respect, cooperation and responsibility. We want the students not to sit there and just take in lots of information, but to actually ask why, how, when, etc. So what is poverty? Where does it occur? What are the causes? What are the impacts on people and their communities? And what should I do?
In a similar speech I gave to my school, I talked about my dream of studying human rights law, perhaps even working for the UN, when he turned and said to me, "You know, human rights lawyers don't really earn as much as commercial lawyers, right? And that the UN has a lot of voluntary work." Now, these are the attitudes that global education combats. Without information, without knowing about Hitler or the Khmer Rouge, without global education, it is impossible for us, with the world at our feet, to know what to do. And we really do have the world at our feet. There is no reason why we should be content to work as just another doctor in just another hospital, or just another lawyer in just another law firm. We need to think different, but how can we if we don't know why?